Well, driving down this morning, that's what I was thinking about. With God, all things are possible. And as I reflected back in some 40 odd years, I remember Colville being spoken about frequently by Brother Joe Robinson and Brother Womersley and so many others. Go right back to the founder of the Pentecostal Church in Congo, W.F.P. Burton, and so many down through the years who have been linked to Colville. And when Don and Vi Gordon finally retired, the people at Colville began to support feeding programs through Sybil and I don't know if you ever heard how the actual nutrition program started. But this just shows you this theme that runs through mission, whether it's in church planting, whether it's in helps that are needed at any given time. With God, all things are possible. We went to bury a child of one of the Bible students at Lubumbashi in Zaire in 1991. And when we went to the graveside, I counted the number of small graves, 325, that had all been buried since the last heavy rain. You can tell on earth, when the rain had not fallen on these. And I could see Sybil sobbing. And she came back home, and I had some things to do, and she went into Lubumbashi, into the city, and bought soya and sugar and other things that she needed. And she came back in, and I said, what have you been doing? And she said, I've got to do something for these children. I can't just leave it as we've seen it today. We've got to do something. And I said, well, where did you get the money? That was the wrong question to ask. She says, I took it out your drawer. I said, Sybil, that is not permitted. That money is designated. You can't do that. Well, she said, I've got to do something. And we had a little bit of a, what husbands and wives like, when you have a disagreement. Anyway, an hour and a half later, we were very, very few missionaries in Lubumbashi at that time. Most had gone. But a Methodist man came across and he gave us a letter. And inside the letter was a cheque for £1,000 to help to alleviate suffering. So the money was immediately paid back. And Sybil said, that's it. That's my go-ahead. She said, I have got to do something in this massive city, and with the Lord's help, we will feed children and stop them dying of hunger. It was so drastic during the war that people were burying their children in their own gardens because they could not afford even to tell their relatives because they had no food to feed them. And in Africa, it's very, very important that you feed your visitors. She started with one church and a great African colleague, and everything that missionaries do in Africa are linked to indigenous colleagues. And sometimes people think, oh, it's a missionary. It's not. We work, even Brother Burton, right at the very beginning, he worked with a man who had been released from Angola, a slave, and he worked together with him, and together they planted churches, and they taught people, and they trained people, and that is how it works. It's not just the missionary going out and doing his own thing or her own thing. Anyway, Sybil, together with Pastor Mokaya, they went and spoke to a pastor and said, let's start a little program in your church. And that's where I got involved as the organizer. And we ended up with more churches than I can remember and feeding 30,000 children every day. And we never lacked a penny. with God, all things are possible. And Colville came online as well, and these little bits and pieces from old ladies and Tear Fund. At that time, they wrote to us and they said, "Can we help with anything?" And we just kept on going for nearly 2.5 years until we saw, and no child went hungry. And many, many parents, when they saw that their children were being cared for and looked after, they became Christians and believers and joined assemblies. There's two facets, isn't there? You can speak to people, you can witness, but you can also be kind and caring and gracious, and both have the same message of the love of Christ. So with God, all things are possible, and we thank you for your dedication to missions over the years. And I want to take you now in a short trip through Africa to try and get a grasp of what mission is like. We have always been linked to Central Africa missions. Down in Bedford, Mr. Harold Womersley, he gave me some very, very good advice before I went out to the field. He says, don't expect, he said, to get on with everyone, because iron sharpens iron. And one of the things in God's work is, you're going to have problems with people. He said, but he said, you've got to get through that, and you've got to trust the Lord. And the Lord is not taking you out there for what you can do for him. He's taking you there because there's something he can do in you that he can't do anywhere else. And I've never forgotten that. And anyway, a little trip through Africa, and maybe I'll stand over here, and if somebody has a question, anything you like, we'll try and give as best an answer as I can. Zambia is a lovely country. That's where David Livingstone first found the Victoria Falls with his guides when he went out there. And 60% of Zambia's population still live in rural areas, and witchcraft still has a hold on the majority of the population. Now that's exactly where we are situated there, right in the top of Zambia on the Congo-Angola border. 13.5 million people, and still quite a low life expectancy in many areas. Oh, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. My mistake. There we are. This is at Nyang'ombe Christian Training Centre, where we live just now. About 40% of our time is teaching, and 60% of the time is in practical work with different groups, like medical, HIV/AIDS training, skills training, where we train carpenters, builders, dressmaking and design, computer, agriculture, and practical helps wherever we can do that. So this is there we are. Now that is Nyang'ombe from the air, and it's right in the middle of nowhere. The only great thing about it is there's a river nearby, so we have a turbine generating electricity, so that when people come in, we can run different projects, and leaders from Zambia, Angola, DRC attended. 2,400 came in during 2024. So we have plenty of people come into the, I don't know what's happening here. I know what it is. I was facing this in the wrong direction. I was facing it towards the screen when I should be doing it towards our brother up the back. Right. Children's ministry is a very important part, and that's 350 who have come in for ministry training. As I said earlier, we work together with great African people, Zambian people, in order to be culturally appropriate. Roads are never fun in the wet season. You never quite know what you're going to find when you go out visiting churches or crossing rivers on rickety old ferries, or coming down at night and finding that the road has washed away. But that's just life in Africa. Sybil has got to be well organised, for doing her shopping. She gets one trip every 3 or 4 months, 200 miles, and she's got to make sure she gets everything and forgets nothing. And that's the way that life is. We still breed pigs and give them to pastors, a male and a female, just so that you can make a living by keeping a pig, and really they can make as much from their pigs as they could teaching in school once they get their piggery running and going. We have some projects for widows and orphans. These are some of the orphans that are run, and the girl over here is now a third year in her Bachelor of Medicine degree, training as a surgeon. So you get a lot of different things in a variety. These are the children, some who have been given a chance to go to school and to go afterwards, and people have supported them down through the years. We have a project called Hope, and we have 72 widows and 72 orphans. So we try to mix and match so that the widows can look after the orphan children, and we bring them in regularly to make sure they're set up with school uniforms and everything else that they need. And here they are getting blankets at the end of the wet season when it gets very, very cold. And they're getting a bit of salt and fish and oil. And it's a tough life living in the bush, a very tough life. We build pets, which are little hand-operated bicycles for mobility impaired people. And they come into Nyang'ombe for repairs. They take them away in bicycles. And basically, it gives, like this gentleman here, go back one. Am I going the right way? Go back one. That gentleman there on his pet, he's able to join. Oh no, I've lost it. Sorry. I don't know what's going on here. Anyway, yeah, it's okay. These little mobility. That old man who was there, he said, "I've become a family member again. I have my dignity back. I can go and collect firewood and enjoy that very much." And it's a simple thing. It doesn't take a lot of our time. We build these, we weld them together, we buy in the wheels, and we're able to give people something to live with. So dignity is restored. We do skills training and these IT projects, and we've trained already people about, I think it'll tell us here, 1,800 students trained by the end of 2024, because computers are coming into Africa in a big way, and we feel we've got to help people get themselves organised. Dressmaking and design, we take courses for ladies to try and give them a start in life, a way they can earn a living for their family. And yeah, that is a great project. And they go away with a sewing machine, and really the transformation is amazing. So we have carpentry as well, and that's the tables and chairs that the boys make, and sometimes girls. I don't make any allowances if they're girls who come in and they make the grade, but I say to them, I don't make any allowance whatsoever. If the boys are on the roof, you're on the roof. You want to do this, that's great. And some of them have really come through very, very well. We train boys also in building, and all the buildings at Nyang'ombe have been built by our trainees. Things like this, and that's a new sewing accommodation room. A new school building that our trainees put up. This is coming to youth camps. We announce a youth camp, and you can get anything up to 3,000 coming, which is something else. And at night time we keep them going with the Jesus film. They're all way around the side and put the screen on the top of an anthill, just so that it works. And we use the same outdoor conference centre for adults having teaching meetings. And you know, when 1,000, 2,000 come in, we run them. Sometimes Africa is a sad place. The reality of HIV and AIDS, men, women and children infected. Thank God for the ARV drugs that are available now, and at least people have an opportunity to live much longer. We find some sad cases. This young man here went into hospital with some swellings on his ankles. A doctor cut off both his feet. And he was left on the operating table bleeding, and his mother went in, bound his wounds up, carried him home. And about 2 months later, Sybil was called to go and see him, and she dressed his wounds for 2 months until they were clean. And then we got Mission Aviation Fellowship to fly him to a missionary doctor. And that's the same young man today. I made his first pair of legs on the lathe, on the turning lathe, and taught him how to walk. But today he's a manager in a hospital, married with his wife and children, and praising God for the way that he was able to go from virtually a wasted life to, because we don't have prosthesis or anything there, but we did manage after about 5 years to get him sorted out with a good pair of legs, which he still has. Children with cleft palates, we scoop them up from villages all around, and they go away and get operations, and look, the same wee boy with his face all sorted out, another one with a cut lip, and that's him repaired. And they grow up perfect, and they never know that anything about it, and it's just lovely to bless children like that. And they used to die, but that's the same baby, operated on a second time, and he's now this high, running around, causing trouble that any young boy does. Sybil was in a village, and she came across a mother carrying a 16-year-old girl on her back. It turned out that she had fallen backwards into a fire, and that's the scar tissue on her leg there, and she couldn't straighten her legs, so she couldn't walk. So we prayed about it, and again, with God, all things are possible. And one day, a surgeon colleague called me. He said, Benya is walking, and she's fine. I met her in a village about 6 months ago, and she introduced me to her husband and 2 children, and said that God had given her a new life, and they were totally committed to the Saviour. It's beautiful, the things that happen. That girl there, you see the bone sticking out her arm? Been there for 7 years. And because no one understood it, they thought this is witchcraft, and no one would help her. But the mission doctor, we got her over to Chitokoloki, and you see her arm, the scar is beginning to heal. But she whispered to Sybil, she said, now I can get married, and everything's normal. And she's a lovely kid, and you can see that from her smile. With God, all things are possible. Feeding programs, nutrition programs. There are so many children who need help over this first 3 years or so, and it's lovely to be able to have the funds to get milk powder and other things to help them. So the ladies every Friday and Tuesday, they cook soya, they dish out the soya and the children eat it all there, and they take some home with them. And basically that's Sybil getting it all, the milk powder for the young babies out of that one's only a kilo. What's that, 2 pounds? But, with a bit of help and a bit of care and a bit of instruction, they survive. And many that we thought were going to die when they were babies 20, 25 years ago, they're now studying to be doctors. Which is lovely. It's lovely. And it's a joint effort between God's people overseas and those who are there. And that's the kind of children we have. So Sybil's the galloping granny. She jumps on her quad and carries her stuff all over the place. How can we deal with malnutrition on a bigger scale? The first thing we did was we bred and trained steers to plough and to dig bigger gardens. And we had to get our own herd of animals. You know, we've got about 200, which is just a little hobby of mine to keep the animals going. But we have the best of bulls and the best of steers. We build the ox carts. And now all over the province, ox carts are running like that to help with, basically, with gardens and making gardens bigger. We put up a spray race because we do all the veterinary work for not only our own cattle, but for everyone's cattle, and make sure that the animals are healthy, and we provide whatever is needed. Children get involved in gardens, the entire family participates, so that the life skill is passed on to the new generation. When we first went to Nyang'ombe 25 years ago, no house had more than 20 sacks of maize. That was about a ton to do for the whole year. Today, there is no house with less than 200 bags. The harvests have been great. 10 years of agricultural training has paid off. And today, the storehouses are full. And basically, families have enough to eat, and some over to sell and pay for their family education needs. And this year we had 10,000 sacks, 500 tons, from the farmers just around Nyang'ombe, which is totally amazing, incredible. And that's up from 200 sacks from all the families, which is, back in 2004. Another way that we thought the Lord might help us to answer the problem of nutrition is that research shows that hippo in a river actually produce help the fish stocks to multiply between 7 and 10 times. That's because of hippo poop going into the river and fish food and everything else, So we went and captured hippo. And they weren't overly happy with the exercise, but we darted them. We got them on the land. Sometimes they chased us. Sometimes we chased them. But we got them into a truck when they were dozy, weighing about 2 tons. Moved them to a different river and released them. And now the river has produced. That's one of the hippo that is sleeping after being darted. Now, before hippo, 7 men fishing all night caught about 4 pounds of fish, and that was to feed about 40 people. Look at that. That's the same work of 1 man fishing 23 pounds of fish. That's the difference that the hippo have made. God didn't make any mistakes, so we put in a big turbine to do a whole area and commissioned it in 2007. And today it's giving an income into the Northwest Zambia Development Trust, which is all run by Zambians, to help in medical education. $30,000 coming in to a group of men who are allocating it. And it's part of our exit strategy if we ever have to leave, that things will still go on. And that turbine has been put in, and there's another one that we're due to put in this coming year that is a mirror image of that one. So basically, that's you had a little trip through Africa, and that's an Africa people carrier. And there you have what the real work of the Lord is all about. that old man caught me as I was walking out through the bush, and he said, he says, Tata Gordon, he says, come sit down and explain this, what Paul is meaning in Romans. And I thought, this is what it's all about. You know, I've seen what happens, and I don't think Africa's any different from anywhere else in the world. But when the gospel is not there, there's bloodshed, fear, and it just it disintegrates badly. I had to negotiate with some of the rebel groups at one time, and the things that people get up to when they're outside of Christ is just unspeakable. But I'm so grateful for the many hundreds of thousands of Christians that are now in Zaire or Congo or DRC as they call it, and Zambia, as a result of the Lord's working through missionaries who went out there, going way back to the early 1900s. And that is the result today, someone in their little village reading the Bible in their own language and trusting the Lord in their day-to-day work. Now, I don't know how much more time we have, but I can carry on a little while longer if you want. You know, another 10 minutes and then we can find some things to pray about. Life in Africa is very much a situation where you've got to be trusting the Lord at all times. One morning, a man came to our door, and it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and his eyes were burned off. You know, his eyelashes and lids were burned into scar tissue at the top. His nose burned off, his lips burned off. He'd fallen in the fire when he was drunk. And he came and he said, is there anything you can do for me? And I looked and I thought, dear, this is the worst case I have ever encountered. And Sybil just looked and she said, I don't know what to do. There's nothing, I don't have the skills, I just don't know what to do. But you know, with God, all things are possible. I sat with the man, I prayed with him that some way, somehow, the Lord might undertake, but I had no idea what would happen. I walked him about 1 kilometre out of where we lived and sent him on his road and came back, and I walked into the house, and we used to use a high-frequency radio to communicate between different mission stations. And I just heard 2 words, plastic surgeon, and I listened in, and it was people about 600 miles away. So I broke in and I said, Peggy, did I hear that there's a surgeon coming? And she said, yes, he's due to arrive here next Sunday and begin operating on Monday. I said, can I send a patient? She said, of course. So I went in and got this. I jumped on my motorbike on the way after this man on the bush road and found him. And I said, look, I want you at the station at 04 hours on Tuesday morning to get on the train to Kananga, and you're going to see a doctor. So 04 came Tuesday morning, bought his ticket, got him on the train. I waited a little while, but the train didn't leave until 10 that night, so I had long gone and left him comfortable on the train. 2 weeks, 3 weeks went past, and I said to Peggy on the radio one morning, I said, Peggy, what's it? Oh, he said, he's finished. He said, in fact, he's on his way back to you, and you will be quite amazed. And I spoke to I said to her, can I thank the surgeon? And she said, he's right here. So I said thanks to him. And he said to me, last year, I was praying on my own, quietly in the morning before I went to work in the hospital. And the Lord clearly guided me and said, I want you to give 3 weeks of your time in Congo. And he said, 3 weeks passing Sunday, when that man came to my door at 5 o'clock at night and I saw him, I knew that he was the reason that God had called me to come. And I said, how did you get on? He said, well, I've refashioned tear ducts so that his eyes are not dry and the dust doesn't get into his eyes. I've refashioned his nose, his lips. And he said, he actually can now cry. And I said, how did you do that? He said, well, I took parts from his backside, his thigh, and so on. And I was just desperate to see this man, and I heard the train coming, and it hooter going when it was still 10 miles out, and I thought, well, it'll be 6 hours before it gets here. And I went in time to meet this guy, and when he run to me, and he hugged me, he said, isn't God good? He said, look. No, he wouldn't have won any beauty contests, but the transformation was remarkable. And I put his head back and I said, hey, you've got a little bit of your backside in your face. And he said, how do you know? Anyway, I was just having a joke with him. But you see, these situations come in life and you think, what on earth do we do? How can we get through this? With God, all things are possible. We could spend all night talking about the faithfulness of God to come through when things are difficult, when things are tough, when you don't know what to do. Babies, my wife has delivered thousands of babies now. But when there was a really difficult case, she would bring me in to operate some of the equipment or to do a little procedure, maybe like a symphysiotomy or something like that. And you ladies will know what I'm talking about. But I thought I better get a few more skills. So we went to a mission doctor, and he helped us taught us how to do cesarean sections. You see, with God, all things are possible if you're just available. God can work through people to do anything that he needs at that particular point in time. And it's lovely to have walked this walk with the Lord, walked in the footsteps of men and women who were sold out for God down through the years and who went out with Central Africa missions. And we see today thousands upon thousands of churches that are strong and going forward in the Lord. And we have good African brethren who have come up, stepped up to the mark, and are going forward. I don't have any worries about Africa. When I see the way that our people have tackled farming, for the first 10 years of training in agriculture, I thought, we're getting nowhere. And I said to our leaders, guys, we need to change and focus on something else. And I said, no. We know what's happening, Gordon. They said, you go into so-and-so's garden and go right into the middle and you'll see the crop spacing, the planting with soya, but they're not ready to do the whole field until they know it's going to work. 10 years after that, it slides, and now everyone is farming in a way that they can comfortably send their children to school, pay for their education, and pay for health care where it's needed. So I don't worry about Africa. The intelligence is there. They just needed the freedom that Christ brings in the village. Now, this is so important. I had an interview in Ireland on the BBC, and one of the girls who was interviewing me said, what right do you have to go into Africa and take a Western gospel. And I said to her, well, I think that you are singularly uninformed, because it's not a Western gospel. It's a gospel that is, that originated in the ancient Near East, particularly in the Galilee, Nazareth region of Israel. And it's a gospel that liberates men and women. And instead of being afraid of everyone, including those members of their family, they are free in the Lord Jesus Christ. Phones started ringing. I told this girl, I said, I have lived in an African village for years. I know what it's like. And children fear their mothers, they fear their fathers, they fear their aunties, they fear their uncles. And other stories of witchcraft go around, and that's how they live. They live in constant fear. And the phone went. And this man said, I've lived in the same village as Pastor Gordon's talking about, and only Christ, freed me from that fear. One after the other, Malawi, Zambia, other countries who were getting this broadcast were calling in. They were now living, actually. They were now living in Ireland. It had come over. But they were saying that it was the gospel that had freed them to live a normal life and a God-glorifying life. And I thank God for the way that witchcraft has been pushed back and the darkness has been pushed back in a great way. When we went to Nyang'ombe, there was a procedure called the Chikondu, where a charm was put in or on a coffin, and basically, because people didn't understand why someone had died, they assumed that witchcraft had caused the death, and therefore, if there's a cause, there's an effect. And this group would come in, the Achikonde would come in, and they would carry the coffin, usually go to someone who was old and firm, blame him or her for the death, and kill them. This was happening. And some of the ladies said, how can we stop this? I said, the way that we stop it is by taking Christ's presence into these funerals. And 3 ladies went, and people prayed, and the men were a little bit hesitant to go. But the ladies went, and the Achikonde said at that funeral, we can't do anything. There's a strong Christian presence here. We can't do anything. Basically, the Achikonde men moved 40 miles away from where we are. And they don't have that in their funerals anymore in our particular area. And that is how the gospel has pushed back the darkness in the parts of Zambia and parts of Congo where the church has become strong. So thank you so much for your support over the years and for your prayer. The Lord is building his church. Nothing is impossible for him. Many of those who have come to Christ were so deep into witchcraft, and today they are free in the Lord Jesus Christ. And like that old man there, he had some charms one year when I first went, hanging up on the outside his hut to protect his fruit trees and everything else. And he came to know the Lord, and that's now a thing of the past. And he now trusts the Lord Jesus for his day-to-day life and for the future. So thank you for your participation in the Lord's work, for your prayer. The Lord is building his church. We look at the events in the Middle East and we think, we might not have long to keep on going. But the Lord will, when the last soul is saved and the last person brought into the kingdom, the trumpet will sound. And we've got to be ready, yeah? So thanks again, and we appreciate so much all your efforts on our behalf. We work together, don't we? We work together. God is the greatest networker that business thought some years ago that they were the only ones, or they were the initiators of networking. God's been doing it for years, networking with his church and building his church through the support of the saints all over the world. Thank you so much.